Hi, folks. My name is Girish, the host for Back to Basics. Another Back to Basics for another week, another day. So today we're going to talk to a author, and we're going to talk about the title of the book is "Adventure of Women in Tech: How We Got Here and Why We Stay." That is a full title, but we're going to say Adventure of Women in Tech. How about that? And then we'll get into the basics of that into the call today with Alana. Alana, how are you? And thanks for coming on Back to Basics.
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. So before we get into the book and everything else, what does Back to Basic mean to you?
Oh, I think it's always about thinking about what are the most elemental things that we need both to survive, but also to thrive. And I think hopefully stripping out a lot of the noise in the world and focusing on those elements.
Yeah. Thank you again, Alana, for answering that question, and thank you again for coming on my show. I'm definitely honored for you to be here. So, Alana, this book is about the adventure of the woman in tech. But why? We're gonna get into the details of that. But my main question is why tech and why not business or healthcare or anything else? So let's go with that first.
Let's start there. I think, first of all, people always say, write what you know. And I've been a woman in tech for over 20 years. And I think that while there are very common experiences
Hmm.
across business, there's also some unique aspects. Often, women in tech, particularly in technical roles, might be the only one in the room
Hmm.
because it's still a very male dominated space.
Hmm.
And it's also been quickly developing over the last 20 years. So, depending on when you joined, or even now, if you're thinking about entering it, you might be still trying to figure out what it is. It's
Hmm.
not as defined as finance or manufacturing.
Hmm.
And so, I think for me, as I was thinking about what I would want to write about, it was partially knowing that, but also at the time, it was like when I was thinking about writing the book, it was really post Me Too. And a lot of the articles coming out were really very focused on the negative aspects of working in tech.
Hmm.
And so I think that I was really interested in saying, okay, well, let's dig deeper. Like, what is positive? What's negative? And
Hmm.
why are women joining tech? And how are they navigating? And why are they staying?
Hmm. So, what did you find in those findings, or is that in the book? That explains
Well,
in the book.
yeah, you're gonna have to read the book.
Of course, of
Yeah,
course.
but to give you a teaser, I was interested when I wrote the book in interviewing a bunch of different women from different backgrounds. So
Hmm.
I interviewed 80 plus women from, you know, different walks of life, some technical roles, some non-technical roles, right? Like maybe sales, maybe engineering, maybe finance, maybe legal, but all in technology companies,
Hmm.
and seeing where did they come from, what inspired them to join tech, how has their journey been, good and bad, and how's it going.
Hmm.
And well, I don't want to talk forever, but what I would generally say is I was pleasantly surprised, especially given all the scrutiny in tech and the negative stories about working in tech
Hmm.
that I'd been seeing in the press, that most of the women had ups and downs, but were really interested in staying in tech.
Hmm.
It had been a lucrative career for them. It had given them great opportunities, often a ability or opportunity to change the world. And that's what they were looking to continue to do.
Hmm.
So that was reaffirming. It wasn't that I didn't talk to women who left tech. I did, and that's in the book. But it was really reassuring that I wasn't just telling myself this story, that when I look around me at work, all these women are having a good time and want to stay. No, that
Yeah.
was mainly true. And I found that what had been my gut about why women were staying and why was leaving was mostly true too.
Hmm.
That when over time those opportunities to change the world or advance or work with great people that they enjoy, when those lessen and degrade over time, and mounting, whether it's family pressure or other life's interests are coming, there's this mix that can happen where it's no longer as compelling to stay. But often they may not stay with you in your job, your company, your role, but they may move elsewhere in tech. And so I think those were my two main takeaways, was that, like, yes, this journey is worthwhile, and I can feel confident wooing women from all over to come join tech. But at the same time, we do have to watch out for them, that over the time, over years, they aren't getting bogged down by administrative roles, by having to volunteer for more tasks that don't get them recognized, career opportunities that don't help them climb the ladder, and really watch out that they are able to fulfill their career ambitions, but also do meaningful work.
Yeah. So, Alana, from your findings, by the way, thank you again for that. So, from your findings, do you think this is more challenging for women? That's why I think they're staying there? Because it puts them on their toes versus, I'm not saying the others are easy, but I'm just saying, technology, it seems much more difficult in the woman's world or in the man's world to get into that. And they're fighting every day.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. Like, that there's a challenge there, right? Like, there's maybe intrigue. I will say that there's a lot of career paths nowadays that would generally have similar challenges. The finance world is not exactly a ladies' world. The construction world is not a ladies' world. So I don't know necessarily that I would say that was part. Certainly, there are folks who are, I don't know, survivors. They love the challenge. They're nitty gritty, thick skin, all of that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, maybe they sort of self-selected for sure. And I think that's probably true across different industries as well. I think probably what I was seeing more is that because technology was growing so quickly and fundamentally changing the world, that women were often really into figuring how they could help the world through these means. How could they scale what they wanted to do? One woman told me this story of volunteering in a country with farmers and seeing the change that when they degovernmentalized who could sell phone chips. And all of a sudden the price dropped from $800 for a phone SIM chip to $5 for a phone SIM chip. How that changed how the farmers worked, because they could compare prices on the fly now that they had mobile phones. And saying to herself, well, that just did more than I could do in a lifetime, volunteering directly with these farmers. Technology has this ability to help people that I couldn't do by myself. And so I think that's the seed of it I see with a lot of women. Women in general, and this is a big generalization, but we've been raised for generations to support we're the traditional caretakers. We support family, we support society. And so even if we're sort of bucking the trend, that's still encoded in us. Even if, like, we're not staying in the family or staying at home and we're going to work, there's still something about helping others that I think is often a commonality you'll see amongst women. And one that I think shouldn't be overlooked when we're thinking about great career opportunities for women. It's not like we should shy away from that.
Of course not.
It's a superpower, it's a strength, it's an interest. And definitely the seeds of it I saw in a lot of women's stories for why they joined tech and why they stayed.
Yeah, thank you again for that, Alana. From your observation, with all the ladies that you have spoken with in the technology field, do you think they have just sat there in that same position for years till they got to the next level? Or did they got to the next level pretty quickly? Because the comparison that I'm looking at, men, it seems like they have quicker push to the other position very quickly in the technology field versus ladies. Is that a true statement, or do you think that's fair?
I think it's not entirely accurate, but it's also not inaccurate. It's one of those, like, it's
Yeah,
somewhere in the middle. Because
right.
what we see, and we see this across industries, it's not just in tech, is that in the early years of the career, women are equal. They're keeping pace with their male counterparts. Sometimes even you see a slight edge to women because women do excel in these entry level roles where you have to, get the job done,
Yeah.
right? Because that's kind of what we've already always been successful at school. We're the quiet, studious ones, and we get things done.
Yeah.
And meanwhile,
Of
the
course.
boys are yelled at for being rowdy. Again, generalizations everywhere. If you're a rowdy lady, I'm not excluding you. But generally, this is how society has trained us, right? Women are commended for being quiet and doing their work. And men aren't necessarily all that penalized for not being that when they're young. And so initially, we are keeping up, if not sometimes excelling, compared to male counterparts. But then you see a major dip when it starts to come to leadership, because men have been trained more for leadership roles. All along the way, their leadership qualities have been commended, not necessarily subdued. The American archetype, anyway, of being a leader is someone who can take up space in a room and command a room. And men often have the physical edge by being tall and deep voiced. And they have, like all along, maybe that thing that made them get in trouble at school where they took up all the room and distracted everyone. Now it's to their advantage. Maybe all those ideas that they've had their whole life and distracted them from getting things done. Now in an atmosphere that appreciates innovation starts to take over. So again, generalizations here, you'll see women with these same attributes. But again, societies has tended to applaud certain qualities over others. So even without the fact that women then get pregnant and there's other kinds of issues, you already start to see men get promoted into leadership roles at a faster rate than women. And this is, of course, exacerbated if you look at minoritized populations, right? When is the Black woman getting promoted? When is the Latino woman getting promoted, et cetera? So the rates are where there you start to lose. And I believe this is across industries. You definitely see it in tech, but you see it elsewhere as well. And it's why there are so few C-level positions that are held by women and board-level positions that are held by women as compared to men.
Yeah.
So definitely there, something big to focus on.
Yeah. Thank you, Alana, for that. Just 1 second. Let me go and speak with my audience 1 second here. So guys, this is just her observation of the 50 people or 80 people, whatever number of people that she has met. This is from her point of view as to what the women are doing in tech and how fast are they growing, how fast they're not growing, or if it is a racial thing, discrimination thing, whatever it is. That's just her research. So just mind you that in this episode we're just talking from an opinion point of view from one person, nothing else. So just keep that in mind.
Totally. I will say there's data. If you search around, you can find data to
course.
support statements I am making.
Of course.
But I think it's fine to take this with my sort of 20 years experience in mind and not necessarily extrapolate without doing your own research.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you again, Alana, for that. So before we get into a little more deep into the book, let me just go back a little. What is your background and where did you come from and then you started this book?
I was a history major at the University of Virginia, and I got interested on the side in what was then just the beginning of website design and sharing information online. And I self-taught myself HTML and a little bit of JavaScript and started to do web design work. And when I graduated from college, was a webmaster at the college that I went to. Did that for about a year, then moved out to the Bay Area, did another startup, and then joined Google. And I just had my 20th anniversary at Google. So I've been at Google for quite a while, to date myself, and have had a few different jobs along the way there, all really focused on operations, like how you get things done, right? How do you run the ads product? How do you run ads policy? How do you roll out Google Fiber to homes and have great customer service? How do you help engineers get things done in search? And leadership. I run big teams.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you again, Alana, for that. So let's get back to the book, if you don't mind. So, do you think ladies in technology or other fields, do you think they get threatened when men they talk? Let's put it this way: when you're in a meeting, I'll give you an example.
Yep.
I'm in a meeting with this lady, and she's on the leadership role, regardless of whatever the positions are. Okay. With that scenario, let's say I'm the lower one and she's the higher one. Even though that if I speak in a firm matter with any points, do you think that the ladies actually feel threatened?
I've never really seen that. The environment in tech is fairly debate driven. People are used to debating ideas. If you're in a room talking about a technology solution or an idea, pretty used to like passionate dialogue, etc. In my experience, it does vary from company to company. However, there is an expected reasonability, right? Like if you start to pound your fist and scream in a lot of these tech environments, people will be like, hey, that's not cool.
That's not right.
And you'll definitely hear some stories about caustic environments. But the whole reason why you hear the stories about the caustic environments is because that's not really typical and it's frowned upon. So generally, I haven't seen in sort of the normal spirit of debate that much come up. I have seen, however, often people interpret certain people's styles as aggressive. And it's not always the men. Sometimes it's a really vocal woman. And that's because we have these unconscious biases. Even if the woman's tone is exactly the same as the man's tone, if we think it's like more aggressive, like we tend to kind of, a strong vocal minded woman can be deemed aggressive, not assertive, like the more negative aspects of it. I've seen that come up more, and us have to sort of navigate it in performance conversations. Like, how would we advise people who aren't maybe the classic mold how to thrive in tech? So if you're the quiet Asian, for example, how do you thrive? If you're the bossy British guy, how do you thrive? If you're a strong-minded Black woman, how do you thrive? And so I definitely see versions of it, but not necessarily what you described too often.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, thank you again, for Alana, for that. Now, regarding, you brought up a point of diversity. Do you think diversity plays a huge role in the women's world?
I think it goes back to belonging. So we talk a lot about belonging nowadays. Not a phrase, when I started in tech 20 years ago, it wasn't like we thought about it.
Right.
I'm sort of, you see me moving around, it's because I'm starting to escape the sun. The sun is coming for me. If you're listening to this, you won't understand. But if you watch the video, you'll see the sun is chasing me. And we didn't think about belonging for years because we frankly didn't have to. It just didn't come up. But there was probably someone in the room who didn't feel like they belonged. And it followed them their whole career. Maybe they were the only Indian guy in a room of white men. Maybe they were the only Latino in a room of people who didn't look like them. So it's not gender specific at all. it can be across anything. Maybe you're the only the person who doesn't have money in a school of relatively affluent people. And that feeling, belonging, is one of the primary things as humans we need to feel. We need to feel like we're part of a tribe. And it makes us feel safe, secure. And when we feel safe and secure, we can flourish and we can be confident and we can show our talents. And when that's not there, we spend a lot of energy and time being obsessed with how we come across, whether we are fitting in, how we could fit in, etc., instead of just doing our best work and thriving. And so I don't necessarily always see women arguing or other minoritized populations arguing for diversity for the sake of diversity. There's a lot of good studies about how that leads to better ideas, more profitable outcomes, all sorts of things. But often it's like, it's a more elemental thing. It's a more elemental thing. You know, if I'm the only Black woman in the room, I don't belong. I don't feel like when I speak up, my ideas are accepted. When I tell you that you're heading in a wrong product direction, that you hear me. But on the other hand, if there's a couple other people in here who have similar backgrounds, similar races, they'll amplify me. And it's no longer as big a weight to me. And I have people I can go to, or I'll look across the room at them and they'll know what I'm thinking without words. And that feeling, those unspoken feelings, are huge. And so, you know, I do think it's big. I think it's bigger to companies than they realize. I think it's opportunity cost. I don't think they realize what they're not getting out of employees, what ideas you're not getting, what work you're not getting.
Right.
Because your people have to worry about all these unspoken things.
That's right.
That could be resolved through diversity.
Yeah. Thank you again, Alana, for that. And before we leave today, one last question for you. The book that you have, is this a span of, let's say, 20 years of women in tech? Or is it like last year?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, because I think it's another yes and no. I think all my answers are yes and no. So I interviewed the women in 2019. There's the book if you're watching the video.
Yeah.
I interviewed the women in 2019. And so in some ways, I do think it's a bit of a time capsule of how they felt in their careers at that moment as I was interviewing them. However, they were talking about years and years of careers.
That's right.
So a collective experience over those years. So, you know, 80 times however many years all of these women had. But because it didn't cover 2020 and 2021, which I think were such interesting years, I even had to add a little epilogue as we were mid-COVID, as I was editing the book, to sort of say like, oh, hey, things are changing. I wonder what that'll lead to. There is a little bit of this time capsule feel to it, I think. And I was just thinking about like, oh, in a few years, should I go back to the women? Or in 10 years, should I go back to the women and see where they are now? So yes and no. It definitely spans their careers and my careers. There's stories about my career from yesterday through 20 years ago. But it's also got a little bit of a moment in time feel to it, I think, because of when I interviewed people and how they felt that day, right? You know, they might answer my questions differently now if I went back to them.
Yeah, on a funny note, if you think about it, if you buy a laptop now, it's obsolete within 4 months. So I feel you should go back to the ladies maybe next year and find out and dissect that book and see that if there is a difference. Don't you agree with that?
I don't know whether next year. This is a little bit of the debate. I'm like, oh, should I, you know, is it 5 years to see where they've gotten X further years out in their career? Is it 10 years? But I do think, yeah, there is something there that I've just started to think about now. I have a follow-up workbook coming out in May, which is more about taking tools that I talk about in this book and giving people exercises to help develop those tools, things like resilience and self-marketing. So different type of follow-up. But yeah, maybe down the road, kind of part 2. We'll see what happens.
Very cool. Thank you so much. And if there's a part 2, please do look us up, and we'll talk about this part 2 also. So thank you again, Alana. So before you leave
Awesome,
today,
thank you.
yes, thank you. So before you leave today, any last words before you leave from Back to Basics, and what are your thoughts about Back to Basics?
Well, I think, I do think we ended up talking about some basics, like how do people feel at core about their careers, what motivates them, and what brings out our best talent in terms of feeling like belonging. And so I think thinking about those things, even if you think some of them sound a little like, I don't know, modern and mystical and marketing terms, thinking about how that's played out in your career, because there's always seeds there, right? Even if you're not totally bought into the word belonging or whatever, there's questions for yourself about where have you seen your team members do their best work? When do they feel most confident? What are the environments they operate best in? And so I think there's always a little something there for everybody, some kernel, some basic kernel that they can take away.
Yeah. Thank you again, Alana, for coming on my show and making this brighter and trying to understand this book and dissect this book as much as we can. There's a lot of stuff in this book, and I told you right before we recorded this, I've done only 10 pages of it, and it's still amazing. It's really, really amazing book that what you have started, and hopefully there will be a part 2 and a 3, hopefully.
Ooh, okay. Well, send me suggestions.
I will. We'll talk offline, definitely. Thank you again, Alana.
Thank you.
Guys, we spoke with Alana today, and we talked about the basics of women in technology, how they suffered, how they're enjoying, whatever the process is. Those 80 women or 90 women, depending on the number of people that she's interviewed, is just too many stories to cover in that one book. And then on top of that, she's talked about the part 2 that she's going to be taking care of, and I gave her a hint for part 3. So let's see how that goes. But guys, as usual, as always, there is a quote of the day from Back to Basics, and hopefully Alana will like that. The quote of the day is, "Nothing in life is to be learned. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may be fearless." Guys, as usual, as always, what do we always say at the end of the episode? Everything in life goes back to basics, and that's what we did today, guys. Guys, take care, God bless, and I will see you next week. Take care, God bless. Alana, how did you like that? Next week's episode on Back to Basics.
That's all the money I had in my pocket. $50. The next day I filed bankruptcy. And I started over in Massachusetts where I had met a girl. And I moved there and I started over. I got a job working in a mailroom at an insurance company in Worcester, Massachusetts. I took the second shift. I worked as many hours as I possibly could at this insurance company. I moved up the ranks over the next 2 years and eventually moved out of the company and found another job that paid more money. And I just kept working on myself. And that was in 97 that I made that move. And then I started this part-time web company in 2002. And in 2003, Labor Day of 2003, I got laid off. And I thought it was the worst thing that probably ever happened to me. But it turned out it was the best thing. I took a contractor job with the company Lycos.com, the search engine. I worked for them for about 15 months as a contractor. And in 2005, went full-time with my web agency, and I never looked back. I've been self-employed ever since. And for me, that breakdown moment